también. A mí también.
Buenas noches. Good evening. Today's event is in English, so I'm going to start with English right away, if you don't mind. Pero bueno, buenas noches, también en español. For us, it's very nice to have you all again. We would like to welcome you to this space, the Mark Twain Library, and we are honored to host this series of talks with, the presence and also the insights from Jacques Sagot. And today is an evening dedicated to Edgar Allan Poe. We're talking about Edgar Allan Poe for the second time. He's a writer that gave us a lot to think about. He's a reference in terms of mystery, right? So, and also, this aesthetic, right? This very Gothic aesthetic that he created. But I'm not the person who's going to give the comments. That's going to be Jack. So I'm going to ask him to please come to the piano and then start the talk today. We would like to welcome him with an applause. We always do that just to encourage him.
Muchas gracias.
And the floor is yours.
Gracias, Isaac. Mil gracias, querido amigo. Y gracias a todos ustedes haber desafiado una noche fría, lluviosa, oscura, fea, para venir aquí. No, nunca me he sentido tan halagado. Realmente yo me dije, hoy si acaso estará Giselita, Giselita es mi personal manager, agente, representante, vocero, asesora de imagen, etcétera, etcétera. Y me siento feliz de estar con ustedes. Las caras nuevas, que espero que sigan, que se hagan ya frecuentes, realmente. ¿Dónde está? Ahí están los dos muchachos. Sí, ahí los tengo de primeros y no los había visto. Bienvenidos. Comencemos con un poquitín de música, si les parece. Esto es... Es un vals de Chopin. Hoy estoy con un pequeño problema. Estoy con un problema auditivo. Entonces me cuesta ponderar cuán duro o menos duro debo hablar. Me disculpan, si estoy hablando muy bajito me dicen, ¿verdad? Y si estoy aturdiéndolos, como si tuviera un megáfono aquí a 2 metros, me dicen también. No es una buena idea para un músico tener problemas de oídos, ¿verdad? Y está Beethoven que lo prueba. Y hay otros. Bien, aquí les doy, hay otros músicos que se daron solos. Hablaremos de eso después. Okay, we have Edgar Allan Poe today. Wonderful writer. Wonderful. Oh my God, is he great. And this is a story called The Telltale Heart. The Telltale Heart, El Corazón del Autor. One of his very best Gothic stories. A great question arises concerning this story, an enormous question, which is, I think, is at the very basis of the story. Are we talking of a supernatural thriller, or are we talking about a psychological thriller, which in fact has nothing paranormal or supernatural? Everything happens in the head of the protagonist, or is it indeed a tale where we have to see the intervention of superhuman forces? I think it's crucial to answer that question. I want to see what you feel, not what you think, what you feel about it, because I don't have the answer. And I think this could be seen both ways. So without Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 in Boston, same year that Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy was born, the great German composer. Welcome, my very dearest friend, Sabrine. We're very good friends for a very long time ago. Such a joy to see you. Today we need to talk in English. Well, we will have the pleasure to talk in English. It's not that we have to. It's always a glory to speak in English. Anyways, Poe was born in 1809, same year that Felix Mendelssohn. He died age 40, for Christ's sake, in 1849. The same year of the death of Frédéric Chopin, the author of this waltz. So, which I didn't plan, but, I guess, subconscious mind plays little games with you. So he only lived 40 years. He lost his father when he was born. His father abandoned the family, and his mother died 2 years after he was born. So he basically had no, especially the void of the absent mother, haunted him all his life. And he wrote a lot of wonderful stories with feminine names, women names: Berenice, Eleanor, Morella, Ligeia, Madeline Usher, that appears in the Fall of the House of Usher, could very well be his very best story. And I would bring it here. It has a promise a bit long, but we may bring it one day. But this is wonderful. So he was haunted by that all his life. He was alcoholic, as we know, and he died in an alcoholic coma. Not in Boston. He died in Baltimore. There is a museum house in Baltimore, another in Boston, and several other places. He was a narrator, a storyteller, one of the greatest storytellers in history. He was a poet. He was a little less even as a poet, but he has some beautiful poems. I'm going to read something for you later on. And he wrote one novel, The Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym from Nantucket. That's the Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym, which you cannot help establishing the relation. Edgar Allan Poe, Arthur Gordon Pym, It's a story that doesn't conclude, doesn't end. It has a sort of an open end, and it's a marvelous, pre-surrealistic novel that we have to read by all means. Wonderful, wonderful. Julio Verne, wrote a novel called The Sphinx of La Esfinge de los Hielos, that takes place in Antarctica. Wonderful story, where in that story, in that novel, Julio Verne attempts to put an end, a conclusion, a denouement to the unfinished novel by Edgar Allan Poe, and he does a hell of a good job, Jules Verne. And that's a beautiful literary experience. Avail yourselves of the Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym, and then le sphinx de glace, en español, la esfinge de los hielos, and you read them back to back, you will see, you will not regret it. It's a wonder. I mean, Jules Verne was definitely at the height of Edgar Allan Poe. Anyways, we go to read this very peculiar story. Very peculiar story. And we will talk about it, everything that can be talked about it. So here we go. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous, I had been and am. But will you say that I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroy, not dull them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in earth. I heard many things in hell. How then I am mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. Look at that introduction. A guy convincing you that he's not mad, promising that he's going to convince you that he's not mad. You know, what does that tell you already? I mean, typical thing, you know, of a mad person. No, but I'm not mad. You saying I'm mad? I feel insulted. I'm not mad. I'm perfectly lucid. And you know, I won't interrupt any further the reading. Welcome, my dear friends. Very happy to have you here. So we are reading The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. We're going to start the reading again, okay? True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I'm mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroy, not dull them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was these. One of these eyes resembled the one of a vulture, a pale blue-eyed with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. I know, madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. So gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in the dark a lantern. All would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret desire or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved in the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, and with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the thin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him die down. He was still sitting up in bed, listening, just as I had done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all this world slept, I had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had become ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "Oh, it's nothing but the wind in the chimney," or "It's only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stopped with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open. Wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as of watch mace when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, The hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. And yes, so I am, very nervous. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought my heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into his room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. You think me mad? You will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs, and then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had cut all. When I had made an end to these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark at midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with pictured suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard at midnight in the neighborhood during a suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I had to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I lent them the enthusiasm of my confidence. I lent them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. I continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard not. I turned more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung the chair upon which I was sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shriek, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks here. Here is the beating of his hideous heart. Ese es un cuento realmente escrito por un loco. It's the least one can say. It's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story that needs to be read very vividly, because it's the confession, the official confession of an assassin, you know. Now, the person who speaks in the first person, I, we don't know. We always imagine him to be a man. But there are scholars now that suggest that it could as well be a woman. It could be very well a woman. I mean, a woman certainly has the force to drag the old man to the floor and push the bed on top of him and suffocate him. I mean, it's no big deal. I guess anyone could. So it could be a woman, but let's assume it's a man. And now, crucial question, what is the relationship between that man, that obsessive, because it's a monomania. This guy is a monomaniac and a paranoid schizophrenic. And the least we can say, that's treating him nicely. That guy, what is his relationship with the old man? One, is he his servant? Kind of a butler? Perhaps kind of a nurse? Because the old man had problems bathing himself or needed medical attention. Was he a nephew? Was he a son? Nothing, excludes us from thinking that perhaps it's a son and father story. It could very well be. Was he his grandfather? His grandfather? Some kind of adoptive father? I don't know. Whatever the case, he didn't like the old man. And not so much for what the old man meant, but for his eye. I mean, he has a fixation, of unescapable fixation on the eye of the old man, because it was blue. It was covered by a blue película, by a blue film membrane, a blue membrane that made that eye look the eyes of a vulture. And that thing thrilled the guy, scared him to hell, and he felt ashamed to be scared by that. So that scare turned, as it usually does, into hate. We are Western's typically human reaction. We say, I hate spiders. Well, no, you don't hate spiders. Nobody can hate the spiders. Spider does nothing to us. You're afraid of spiders, which is different. So you take fear, a phobia, which means fear, and you call it hate. I hate alligators. They eat deers and people and dogs and domestic cats. I hate them. No, you don't hate an alligator or a crocodile. You cannot hate them. They're kind of ugly, and even that is arguable. But what you have is fear of alligators, so you call it hate. You see, hate, not always, but very often, hate is just a disguise of fear. But you don't want to admit that you're actually scared by that, because that's pricey in ego terms, So you call it you make a kind of a transformation and you call it hate. I hate that person. He is arrogant, stupid, blah, 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 blah. No, you don't hate it. You fear that person. You're scared of that person for God knows what reason. So his fear of the eye is very punctual, very focal fear. It was his eye, not the rest. His eye. From the very beginning, we have a dismembered conception of the human body. A fragmented dismember is the body in pieces, which is what he does. He got his head, he got his legs, he got his arms, and buries them under the floorboards. I know it's horrible. But look, this is Edgar Allan Poe, okay? It's not corintellado. By the way, none of you, Giselita, pásame la cosita esta. Gracias, muñequita, gracias. None of you anymore know who corintellado was, or do you? It's better not to know who corintellado was.
My grandmother used to keep vanidades.
Exactly. So did my grandmother. So did my maternal grandmother, my paternal grandmother, God bless her. And he had all the vanidades and the typical so-called novela inédita por corintellado. Pero si ya está edita, puesto que está en la revista, ya no es inédita. Tontos. Y siempre con nombres como Torbellino de Pasiones, Vórtice de los Celos, Catarata de Amor, Destinos en Colisión, Deseos Oscuros. Todos tenían nombres. No podía, era la cursilería más cursi que he visto en mi vida. Venían en el centro de la revista de unas hojitas ásperas, en unas hojitas de papel áspero, como una especie de separata, como insertadas en la revistilla. Yo las veía, las revistillas, no leía las novelas. Mi abuelita era fanática de esas novelas. Y en el cine mexicano, las telenovelas, las que llamaron, la telenovela Palmolive, ¿verdad? Terrible, porque la anunciaba y la promovía Palmolive y usaban para eso el tema del concierto de Tchaikovsky. Ese tema sublime para anunciar la telenovela Palmolive. Y yo era un chiquillo y ya me indignaba. Yo era un carajetillo y por cierto, he tocado 1000 veces ese concierto, ya viejo, ¿verdad? Y siempre tengo que evocar la novela Palmolive, me lo tengo que sacar de la cabeza. Sí, la novela Palmolive. Y me ha sucedido tocarlo en Costa Rica, no me lo van a creer, y estarlo tocando y oír a alguien allá en las lunetas, mira la novela Palmolive. Vieran qué difícil es mantener la concentración después de eso. Las novelas mexicanas las hacía Delia Fiallo. Igual, novela inédita de Delia Fiallo, producción de Valentín Pimstein. ¿Te acordás, Giselita? Y ahí salía actores de la talla de Ignacio López Tarso, por el amor de Dios, grande, unos actores de Buñuel, Silvia Pinal, tan linda que era, actriz favorita de Buñuel. Salían grandes actores. Joaquín Pardavé ya había muerto. Amparo Ribelles, salía en todas. Era la mamá de la casa, cuyos hijos se metían en problemas, y una niña que ella era de alta sociedad. La niña se casaba con un palurdillo cualquiera, el que vendía copos en la esquina, o el barrendero, y era un amor profundo, pero socialmente prohibido, y entonces al final siempre se terminan casando, ¿verdad? Eso es típico. Eran divertidísimas esas novelillas babosas. Anyways, so we go back to the story. The narrator, who speaks in the first person. Now, there is a narratological term to describe this kind of narrator. It's called an unreliable narrator. An omniscient, unreliable narrator. But that's a technical term. Not an opinion, it's a technical term. An unreliable narrator is anyone who begins a narration in this fashion. Hey, friends, I'm happy you're here because yesterday I had this paranormal experience. So I had the opportunity to see and to talk to dead people, and they made me this revelation of sinister and terrible and ominous things that are going to happen to all of you. Whoever starts a narration that way is unreliable, okay? So this is a case of unreliable narration, very much. And he's a monomaniac, an obsessive guy who has developed this totally pathological obsession, fixation with the old man's eye, the eye of a vulture. Now, basically, I go back to my first initial question. Is this a psychological thriller or a supernatural thriller? Is everything that happens here the beating of the heart, like a clock enveloped, a watch enveloped in cotton? Is everything that happens in the watch happening only inside the mind of this psycho? It is immanent to the guy, or is it transcendent? It is actually happening outside him. There is indeed a supernatural force, sort of a vengeful palpitation of the old man that comes out of the floor. Things that come out of the floor are very disturbing, for Christ's sake, you know. I mean, they fall over your roof, that's bad enough, but if they come from the ground, from your floor, I mean, you have a major problem there, isn't it, Sabrina? You have a very serious problem if the troubles come from underneath your bed, you know, or from your bathtub, or from whatever. Everything that comes from the ground is ominous, is menacing, isn't it? And so again, is there a vengeful voice that comes from beyond the grave to punish and harass and obsess and ultimately, you know, signal the guilt of the assassin? Or is everything happening only inside of his twisted mind, so everything is immanent? Are we in presence of an interior drama or an actually exterior drama? Again, is this a psychological thriller or is it a supernatural thriller? Well, there is no definite answer, is it? Is there? I tend to believe it is a psychological drama. Because if the old man's heart was indeed thumping under the floorboards, the policeman would have heard it. Or maybe not, because if we're in the realm of the supernatural, anything can happen. You know, it could be some kind of thumping directed in a way such that only the assassin could perceive it. There is no answer to this. I feel inclined to think that the thumping of the heart that ultimately denounces him to police, you know, I feel inclined to think that that's happening only inside of his brain. I lean towards that, but I would be very happy accepting the opposite thesis, or hypothesis rather, you know. Now look at the title, The Telltale Heart. Telltale, tick tack, tick tack, tick tack. That's genius. That's genius. Already the title of the tale suggests an onomatopoeia. Tick tack, tick tack, telltale. Those two T's, you know, adjacent one to the other. This is a strike of genius. That's wonderful, you know. I mean, a great writer can be perceived in so many wonderful details, you know. It's amazing. He had many names he could have used, but he chose a name that was itself telling. Telltale. He enjoyed very much doing that kind of stuff. I read you just a little strophe from a sonnet he wrote to Helen. It's a very beautiful thing. I will read only the first 5 verses. Helen, thy beauties to me like those Nician bars of yore, that gently over perfumed sea the weary wayward wandered bore to his own native shore. Suena tan lindo. Es hacer música con con fonemas en lugar de notas musicales. Este verso, con un montón de reiteración de la W. The weary, wayward wanderer bore. Y con el ritmo. The weary, wayward wanderer bore. Significa el caminante gastado, erosionado por montones de senderos, arrastra, ¿verdad? The weary, wayward, worn by the many ways he had walked. The weary, wayward wanderer bore. What I would give to have written that verse, you know. I will give you years of my life. That's quite an assumption. I mean, do I even have a year of life left? I don't know. Nobody knows. You know, people say, "Oh, I'll call you tomorrow." We all assume that there will be a tomorrow, but that's a bet. And bets, you can either win or lose them. Very often you lose them. In fact, most of the time in casinos you lose. Oh, next time, well, I mean, we'll be alive next time. I mean, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but, you know, that's the way it is. I have to tell you a story concerning death, una microhistoria. La voy a hacer en español porque no la conozco en inglés. Sí, en español, fue escrita en francés. Jean Cocteau, el gran Jean Cocteau. Jean Cocteau fue el artista completo. Fue narrador, cuentista, novelista, dramaturgo, poeta, ensayista y luego pintor, dibujante, ceramista, vitralista, actor, director de cine, cineasta, libretista de cine, reparador de capillas antiguas, decorador de interiores. ¿Qué más se puede ser? Todo lo hizo. Era lo que los franceses llaman un touche à tout, un tócalo todo. Algo así me han dicho a mí también. Who cares? I don't care. I don't care. People can be so envious, you know? I mean, let me talk about whatever I want. Look, I know what I talk about. If I talk about soccer, you bet I know. I know the hell about it. Una vez me invitaron a un programilla que se llama Zona Técnica, en el 7. Domingo en la mañana. Llegué, estaban Chinimba, Rojas, Guimaraes, Medford, Wanchop, el Macho Acuña y yo, en la misma mesa. Y esa semana había muerto el gran jugador checo Josef Masopust. Josef Masopust es el más grande jugador que Checoslovaquia ha producido. Estuvo varias veces en Costa Rica porque venía con el equipo Uda Dukla de Praga. Lo que es más, le encantaba que lo llevaran a los volcanes. Tuve un viejo amigo que lo conoció personalmente. Venía con la esposa, ¿verdad? Yo traté de visitarlo cuando fui a tocar en Praga, pero no pude. Lo tenían así como un tesoro nacional, ¿verdad? Escondido, guardado. Siempre le encantaba que lo llevaran. Había visto todos los volcanes. Era un vulcanólogo. Josef Masopust brilló en el Mundial de Chile en 1960, donde quedó subcampeón. Un gran equipo checo, perdió contra Brasil la final 3-1, porque nadie podía no perder contra Brasil en esa época. No, hoy en día un equipo de solteros contra casados les gana. Cochina de equipo. Y es mi equipo. Entonces, hablé yo de Josef Masopust. Entonces tomé la palabra, me dan para un minutito. Hoy estoy lamentando la muerte de este gran jugador, Josef Masopust, y hice una pequeña apología. Terminé y volví a ver a mis compañeros esperando que me dieran pelota. Sí, ya grande. Sí, yo lo vi en el año 72 cuando jugó. Sí, fue en Chile. Hizo el gol del 3-1 en la final contra Brasil. Era magnífico. Nadie sabía quién putas era Josef Masopust. Nadie. Entonces vuelvo a ver yo. Medford se hizo así. Chinimba Rojas empezó a buscar en unos papeles, así, frenéticamente. El macho güero se puso a rascarse yendo por otro lado. Wanchop, igual, me quitó la cara. Me dejaron hablando solo. Me quedé yo. ¿Verdad que era un gran futbolista? ¿Ustedes se acuerdan, amigos? No. Silencio. Sepulcral. Terrible. Y tiraron anuncios. Metieron y pasó. ¿Saben qué pasó? No me volvieron a invitar. nunca más me volvieron a invitar ese montón de viejos boludos. Pucha, yo soy pianista. Si alguien me pregunta quién era Schumann o Liszt o Chopin, yo sé. Estos viejos no han hecho otra cosa en sus míseras vidas que jugar fútbol y hablar de fútbol y no saben quién es Maso Proust. Yo entiendo que esta amiguita aquí que tengo acá, tan linda, que ella no sepa quién es Maso Proust. Ella no es una profesional del fútbol, pero estos viejos toludos tenían que saber quién era Maso Proust. Si yo les pregunto quién era Erik Satie, yo comprendo que no lo sepan, pero Maso Proust, for Christ's sake. Bueno, no me llamaron más, nunca. Fui declarado non grato, expuse su ignorancia y yo no quería incomodarlos. Amiguita, yo estaba seguro que a mí me decía, sí, mira, pateaba con la zurda muy bien y luego aquel chanfle que el pico con efecto todo. No, nada. Como que les hubiera hablado de, no sé, de Hildegard de Bingen, ¿verdad? Una gran compositora del fin de la Edad Media. Yo entiendo que no sepan de eso. Manda huevo. Bueno, no volví, me declararon totalmente persona non grata, me sacaron bola negra. Entonces, el comienzo. True. Now, the story begins by an affirmation of truth, which is very significant. That true means I'm going to talk, I'm going to tell you the truth. Everything that comes out of my mouth is the truth. I speak with the truth. I'm in the side of the truth. I'm the one who knows what really happened. So that's a claim, that's a very important claim. True. Nervous? Very, very dreadfully nervous I am and had been. But why will you say that I'm mad? Nadie está diciendo que esté loco. No tiene por qué defenderse paranoicamente, ¿verdad? But why do you say I'm mad? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. He had a special acuteness, a sort of hypersensibility to sounds, so he could perceive the thumping sound of the old man's heart, you know? So it's especially of the many senses invoked in this story, the hearing is the most important, the most eminent here. And then he says, this is very beautiful. I heard all things in the heaven and in earth. I heard many things on hell too. He oído todo lo que ha pasado en el cielo y en la tierra. Y he oído también no pocas cosas del infierno. How then am I mad? Well, nobody's saying you're a madman. I mean, take it easy. Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. So he assumes his position as the omniscient narrator. He knows all about everything. Now, this story is very interesting because the narrator, the unreliable narrator, is permanently addressing the reader. He's permanently addressing you guys and me. He's permanently, you said that I'm perhaps kind of out of my mind. No. Let me keep with my story. You will see I'm not mad at all. Not at all. Yes, I'm very nervous. I think I already said that I was very nervous. Did I say it? I think I already said it. You tell me, did I say it or did I? Está siempre interpelando al oyente, ¿verdad? Esto es maravilloso. Y Poe fue el primero en hacerlo. Es un cuento en que el loco está siempre interpelándonos. Como que yo estuviera aquí. You know what I mean? Are you following me, guys? You understand me? You think I'm crazy because I'm analyzing this tale by Edgar Allan Poe? I mean, is this in poor taste, perhaps? Am I good enough for this job? Or is that kind of attitude, that kind of paranoid, nervous, schizophrenic thing, you know? I mean, we are talking of a very disturbed guy. No question about that. So, somebody said, using realistic explanations, possible explanations, that there is a bug. No, it's a beetle called the Death Watch beetle. Es un escarabajo. The Death Watch beetle is a very ugly little creature. Lives in the tropic in general. And he's said to produce a sound that's kind of like the one of a clock. Now that insect lives beneath the floor, beneath the floorboards, in crevices, in basements, in little dirty, dark corners. It's a sinister little beetle. ¿Has visto un bichillo de esos? ¿Has visto esos bichillos? Ahora estamos con los abejoncitos de Mayo. Todo el mundo los detesta y yo los adoro a los abejoncitos de Mayo.
Hay que cuidarlos que se están...
Pobrecitos, vieras que cuando yo era un chiquillo perverso, malévolo y maligno, como todos los chiquillos, que tendría 6 años, salía con una paleta de badminton y los apeaba en el aire, los golpeaba, a veces pobrecitos, quedaba la mitad prensadita y la otra mitad salía expelida, quedaba solo el fondillito pegado horrible. ¿Cómo puedo hacer? Yo no podría hacerlo. Hoy los vivo rescatando de todos lados. De las bases de las escaleras, de los rincones, apenas los veo, pobrecitos, estoy tratando de reparar el daño que hice. Y salió mi madre, sí, lo hago por culpa. Salió mi madre y cuando me vio haciendo eso, me dijo, usted venga para acá, deme esa raqueta, nunca más la va a tener en su mano para hacer daño. Estas criaturitas esperan un año entero para salir a la vida en el mes de mayo. Lo que tienen es un día de vida y usted las asesina, sí. No, usted no es hijo mío, váyase. No hay postre hoy en la cena. Mira que hasta el día de hoy me marca eso. Me marca y no es broma. Hoy en día los rescato siempre que los veo. Y a veces encuentro uno que está pegado en una grada y nunca va a poder subir. Y si hiciera un girito hacia la izquierda, ahí tiene el jardín todo para él, pero no sabe dar el girito. Y ya sus patitas arrastran como las piernas de un prisionero, las pesadas cadenas, ¿verdad? Los grilletes colgando arrastran telillas de araña, basurillas, arañas, de hormigas, arrastran de todo. Yo los limpio. Soy la Cruz Roja de los abejoncitos de Mayo. Soy un defensor de los abejoncitos de Mayo. ¿Ah?
No le dan postre en las cenas.
No me dan, no, ya no lo haría. No, Giselita, vieras cómo me marcó eso para que lo recuerde así, ¿verdad? Entonces, hay un abejoncito, there is a beetle called the death watch beetle that produces a sound similar to the one of a heart beating. So some people have said that perhaps what this crazy guy, these nuts, was hearing was actually the sound of those insects. That's a realistic kind of explanation. Nothing can be discarded in a story as ambiguous, as polysemic as this one. Nothing can be discarded. That's a possibility. We have to consider all possibilities. So, it is impossible to say how first they entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye, yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled the one of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Constantemente está enfatizando so calmly and calmly. It proceeded so slowly, but so slowly. You cannot believe how slowly I pushed my head inside of the old man's room. And you cannot imagine how suave, how carefully, so carefully I turn on the lantern, the light of the lantern. Siempre está con adverbios. How cautious. Usted no se puede imaginar con qué cautela, con qué inmensa cautela. Ahí metía la cabeza en el cuarto del viejo. Y luego, nadie puede imaginarse el tiempo que me tomaba con tanta precisión, de manera tan cuidadosa, bajaba la perillita para que entrara solo un haz de luz y ese haz de luz caía justo sobre el ojo del viejo. Siempre está en esas, ¿verdad? How coldly, how cautiously, how slowly, how carefully, but really carefully. It's like someone doing his absolute best to convince us of something, you know? Being very emphatic and indeed very reiterative, you know. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad, Nadie le ha dicho que está loco, está peleando contra nadie. You fancy me mad. Oh, men know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. Este loco realmente es adorable. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in the dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Una hora le tomaba abrir la puerta lo suficiente para meter la cabeza. Una hora. ¿Ustedes se dan cuenta de lo que es eso? Es un movimiento que sería imperceptible, ¿verdad? Algo que toma una hora para recorrer esto y permitirme meter la cabeza en el cuarto, que eso me tome una hora, estamos hablando de una precisión fanática, de una precisión objetiva, de una precisión quirúrgica. Y esto es lo interesante. In this story, as it happens often with Edgar Allan Poe, in this story, there's a constant, a permanent, he permanently addresses science and reason and rationality to justify something that is completely rational, that's completely monstrous, that comes to the darkest corners of the subconscious mind. But in typical Poe fashion, because that's the way he works, he disguises his subconscious ghosts and demons, he disguises under appearance of having complete rational control of them. Oh, I'm in control. Oh, I'm a great scientist, I'm just, trying to solve a case. Dupin, Le Chevalier Dupin, is a detective. Remember that Poe was a creator of the detective story, not the police story. A policeman is a different thing than a detective. It really is, isn't it? No es la novela policial la que creó la novela detectivesca, con el personaje Chevalier, el caballero, the Knight Dupin. We never know his first name. And he used that character only in 3 stories that are all wonderful. The Mystery of Marie Roget, The Crimes in the Rue Morgue, and The Purloined Letter. En la carta robada, desapareció una carta, entra un equipo de detectives, la buscan en todo lado, hasta que llega Dupin y dice, pero no han buscado en el portacartas. Pues aquí está, esta es la carta. A veces lo más obvio, lo más evidente, eso que descartamos, ¿verdad? Y así lo calculó el asesino, lo descartamos, es lo, ¿verdad? Pero búsquenla en la portacartas, por el amor de Dios, miren, aquí está, esta es. Y habían desmantelado la cama, levantado las tablas, analizado las patas de la silla, a ver si eran huecas por dentro y tenían algún manuscrito dentro, una cosa tremenda. Entonces, claro, Edgar Allan Poe creates this kind of characters that are intellectually superior. They're tremendous entities for reason, for very rational characters, oftentimes a detective, But sí, el detective puede ser muy racional y usar todos los métodos científicos, como los hijos, progenie del caballero Dupin fueron Sherlock Holmes, de Arthur Conan Doyle, fue Miss Marple, de Agatha Christie, fue Hercule Poirot, de Agatha Christie, fue el inspector Maigret, de Georges Simenon, fueron todos los detectives de las series de los 70, llámese Columbo, Koyak, Nakia, Vareta, Ironside, Cannon, Perry Mason. That was more of a lawyer, but he acted. Yes, a lawyer, but he acted like a detective, ultimately. All those guys would be inconceivable without Edgar Allan Poe. He's the father of that concept, of that notion of the detective the detective glorified as a superior kind of mind and a superior kind of citizen that has gifts that nobody else has, that outperforms and outsmarts everyone by virtue of his intellectual powers. That figure was created by Allan Poe. Now, the funny thing, the ironic thing is that, yes, the Chevalier Dupin goes with all his instruments, his whole arsenal of rational tools to investigate a crime, but the crime is una mujer que fue amputada la cabeza, las piernas, metida a fuerza por una chimenea, quemada en la... El tema es tan macabro y tan irracional y tan monstruoso y tan subconsciente, tan pesadillesco, que resulta casi ridículo el trabajo de un científico tan riguroso con aquella masacre. Es como que alguien hiciera un edificio perfectamente hecho en términos de ingeniería, de balance, de equilibrio, sobre unas arenas movedizas, sobre un pantano, el pantano de la muerte, del sadismo, del desmembramiento, del horror, que realmente es lo que le gustaba, ¿verdad? Y sobre eso construye un edificio que se llama el Palacio de la Razón Lógica. Bueno, look, ese palacio se va a hacer así porque está mal asentado. This guy is not a detective. He's not Chevalier Dupin by no stretch of the imagination. But still, he's a guy who takes pride on his rational powers, on his analytical powers, on his caution, his precaution, his dissimulation, his skills, his subtlety, you know? It's very subtle. Well, he's a maniac. That's what he is. He's probably a serial killer, because nobody's going to convince me that this is his first crime. He probably has a big list of crimes before. One can only think, you know. So, es muy curioso. Está siempre en Poe. Está siempre. Un enorme foco de magma, una caldera magmática de cosas horribles que vienen de las partes más arcanas de la mente, ¿verdad? Una colección, un zoológico de monstruos horrorosos, una especie de parque jurásico de pesadillas, y sobre ellas construye, el Chevalier Dupin, no, ese no se ensucia un dedo, ese es un razonador profesional, usa el método deductivo e inductivo, el método cartesiano, es un gran científico, yo soy superior a todos. Es tan poiano que inevitablemente tiene que ser un retrato del autor, ¿verdad? El autor era un consciente de que estaba habitado por demonios que no podía nombrar, ni exorcizar, ni expulsar, ni nada. Por eso no solo tomaba alcohol, fumaba opio y láudano y hashish. Toda la porquería que hubiese la fumaba. Terrible.
He does mention a disease. He says the word disease in his first paragraph. He says that it's not
the disease.
Not a result.
The disease had sharpened my senses. Yeah, he acknowledges having a certain unnamed, undiagnosed disease. But he hurries, he hastes in pointing out that disease, whatever it is, did not deteriorate his cognitive senses. No, on the contrary, you know, it sharpened his mental capacities. So he claims, so he says. So he admits having some kind of disease, but attention, it's a disease that actually makes you more intelligent, if anything, or, you know, what's he think?
He mentions the disease, then the persuasive tone begins.
Yeah.
Yes, disease, but so yes, I think that is very, very, very...
Very beautiful. Nice remark. Yeah, the very beginning of the story is an affirmation. True, yes, I admit it. Nervous, I am very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and I am, but why will you say that I'm mad? Well, at the end of the story, we're very convinced that he's mad. Mad as a cow with the cow virus.
That's what I like, because he said, nobody's telling you you're mad. Yes, we are. We are telling him, we are already judging him at the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. He knows we're going to judge him.
Yeah, he knows. He knows. Either he had previous situations like this one, and had been accused of being mad, so he starts defensively. He starts prophylactically, preventively. True. No, I admit, I'm not denying that I'm nervous. I'm dreadfully nervous, but that doesn't mean I'm mad. Why do you say that I'm mad? I'm not. If anything, disease has sharpened the acuteness of my senses. The whole psychology, this is a beautiful psychological thing. I mean, I wish I was a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. This thing would provide invaluable material for all sorts of analysis. Is anyone a psychologist here? No one? We don't have no psychologists. Well, that's too bad. Next time we present a psychological thriller, if it is a psychological thriller, it could be a supernatural thriller. Don't forget that. That's always possible. I think Poe intended it that way. To leave us with the doubt, with the uncertainty. We should have, Lily, we should have a psychologist in residence.
We will, next time.
Con estas historias hace falta, ¿verdad? Yes.
I was curious about this because, okay, he mentions that disease had sharpened my senses. Above all, what's the sense of hearing acute? I was watching an episode of Dr. House today, and there are certain diseases that can provoke that, hearing acute. So, might be related.
Well, look, I mean, he may be right for all we know. There are indeed illnesses that sharpened your sensorial perception, make you more acutive olfactively, visually, taste in terms of taste, of touch, Sure, that happens. There are drugs that do enhance your sensorial powers. Yeah, well, of course, I have never done drugs. Well, not the official ones. I drink too much Coca-Cola. That's about it. I have no vices. I believe I invented my own vices for my own personal exclusive use. But we don't want to talk about that, do we? Now, I'm acting like the character, you see? I'm getting contaminated.
You're justifying your vices.
I'm not a vicious person. I have no vices. Just Coca-Cola. I mean, why are you looking at me as if I was some kind of viciously addicted, drug junk? I mean, that is the attitude of the guy. Thank you. Thank you for that profesión de fe. Por ese apoyo, querido amigo. Tengo cosas horrorosas, pero esas no hablo de ellas. Las escribo y las tengo todas escritas, pero bueno. So he proceeds to describe the way he plans. It's a very planified thing. He doesn't act on impulse. He calculates everything like a very sharp assassin, coldly. Well, not coldly. I mean, he's obfuscated by the eye, okay. But hey, I mean, nobody kills a person because of his eye, The last thing I had to hear on this sad life of mine. There is a league or association with people with visual problems that insisted that this tale was cruel, politically incorrect, and offensive to all people who had visual problems. Like, typically, heterochromy. Heterochromy is the people who have one eye, one color, and another color. Un ojo verde y el otro azul. Uno negro y otro azul. Eso pasa, es lindísimo. Me encantaría haber tenido una novia con heterocromía. Bueno, tal vez todavía me llegue. Voy a poner un anuncio. Se solicita novia con heterocromía. Favor que esta condición venga certificada por un oculista renombrado. Vaya petición, ¿verdad? Siempre me ha parecido tan mágico eso de tener un ojito de un color y otro de otro, ¿verdad? Entonces, believe it or not, there is an association of blind and semi-blind and visually impaired people who they actually wrote a document asking that this tale should be taken out from the canon of the English literature and from the Edgar Allan Poe opus, opera omnia, his complete works. Now that's so stupid. And then what can we do? You know, I mean, are we gonna? No, Poe is always sick. If we have to ban everything in his literature that's kind of pathological, we will not put nothing. Now, his wonderful story, The Fall of the House of Usher, the protagonist is Roderick Usher, who is a friend from youth and school of the narrator that comes to the House of Usher, unfortunately for him, to comfort his old friend, who's apparently suffering from some kind of folly, some kind of madness. And the description of Roderick Usher is exactly the same here. I suffer, my friend, from this unexplainable, unbearable acuteness of all my senses. I cannot hear any sound except the sounds of lutes, laudes, lutes. I cannot feel any light except the light of the falling of the sunshine or the sunset. Tenía las ventanas arribísima, ¿verdad? Los muros y las ventanas. I cannot bear the texture of any material except seda, ¿verdad? Except silk. I cannot bear anything but the most insipid dishes, because I can, even when I go out of this castle, the wind, I feel I'm attacked in all my pores. Every square millimeter of my body is attacked by the wind. Es muy bello, eso es muy lindo, es terrible una vida así, se imagina. And then Roderick Usher is probably secretly in love with his sister, his sibling sister, Madeline Usher. And then, funny way to show your love, he buries her alive, knowingly that he's just having a cataleptic seizure but not dead. Then the sister comes out of the grave, and I won't tell you the end of the story, because many movies, each one worse than the other, have been made on the fall of the House of Usher. I haven't seen them all, including the Netflix thing, you know, the series of the next. It's called the Fall of the House of Usher, but actually goes through several stories of Edgar Allan Poe, you know. But then no, amigos. Me gustan mucho las adaptaciones. No es que sea un purista, no lo soy. La ópera Rigoletto, ¿verdad? El jorobado, el bufón de la corte, a las órdenes del sibarítico duque de Mantua, que agarraba a las mujeres y las deshonraba y las dejaba tiradas, déspota terrible, y que termina perdiendo a su hija Gilda a manos de su jefe, el despiadado duque de Mantua, adaptada en un penthouse en Nueva York en el siglo XXI, donde el duque de Mantua es un gran entrepreneur, es, I don't know, Elon Musk, for all we know, perhaps. Bill Gates, no, Donald Trump, no, no, cancel that. But he could very well be Elon Musk, or Bill Gates, or I don't know, any of those tycoon guys, you know. So he owns the whole damn building, but he has the penthouse to host those parties, those very decadent parties. And then Rigoletto, instead of being a jester, el bufón real, is a barman. Es el bartender, ¿verdad? Sin joroba, es el bartender. Y la estructura de poder se mantiene. El rico patrón y el empleadillo que es un bartender y no sale, y ahí lo humillan, lo regañan, lo insultan, etcétera, ¿verdad? Bueno, eso lo puedo aceptar. Pero no, Netflix, no, al tercer capítulo no pude verlo más, amiga, porque en La Máscara de la Muerte Roja, el príncipe próspero, que es un príncipe y dueño de un castillo y tiene mucho poder, es un personaje muy gótico. Es un negrito, pero vestido totalmente punk, y lleno de tatuajes y con anillos aquí y cosas que le salen por una mecha de un color, otra mecha del otro, y unos bluyincillos ácidos y con huecos y todo un pachuco así. No, eso ya no es el príncipe próspero, y es ya en lugar del príncipe próspero es el líder de una banda, de un gang of urban guys kind of like him. You know, so when I came to that episode, I said, no way. No, my stomach cannot take this. I mean, I'm all for adaptations, I'm all for modernizations, but you cannot, the idea of a prince implies royalty, one kind or another. But a gang leader, that's not royal in any sense. So I could not keep going on. But there is a good movie from 1961, I believe, that is passable. That can be watched. Vincent Price is Roderick Usher. Good. By the way, it's kind of scary. The end is kind of scary. You know, that's the least bad. I will say that I would give that one a 6. You know, in a scale from 0 to 10, a 6. Pobrecita, no puedo evitar contar esto. Yo tenía una amiguita en el Franco que era muy mala en matemáticas. Siempre se sacaba 1, 1.5, 1.4, 1.78, 1.23. Entonces le pusieron Atila, la reina de los unos. La reina de los unos, donde uno no es una etnia, sino la calificación de 1, ¿verdad? Y por así, llámate a la reina de los unos para la fiesta. Vayan a la reina de los unos, que la reina de los unos te preste la tarea para que copies. Bla, bla, bla. Qué crueles somos, ¿verdad? Qué crueles somos, qué horror. Y pensar que reí de eso. Lily, can you imagine? And then we had another friend. She was kind of obese. Yeah, she was very obese, poor creature. Entonces le decíamos Dios. Porque no tenía forma. Terrible, Lily. That's horrible. No, eso califica dentro de una cosa horrible que se llama, tiene hoy en día un nombre técnico, obesofobia. La obesofobia es la fobia contra los gorditos. Y yo sería un vocero en eso, contra los gorditos, porque mire. So, this guy is wonderful. He's so, sí, querido amigo.
Hubo un movimiento de gente que pedía que de alguna manera esa novela fuera modificada, vivíamos por el racismo que era evidente, entonces hay que ubicarlo.
Eso lo ves mucho antes. Vos ves las películas de Tarzán de John Weissmuller, que es el mejor Tarzán de la historia, o las de Lex Barker, o los de Gordon Scott. Esos fueron no fueron los 3 primeros, pero los más exitosos Tarzán. Estamos hablando de los 20, cine silente, 20, 30 y 40. Y cuando iba una caravana de occidentales blancos, ¿verdad? Caucásicos, llevando ahí, todos con sus sombreros blancos. De último iba siempre un negrito que le decían buana y llevaba una canasta llena de frutas y víveres. Y adivinen qué. Cuando atravesaba un estanque, era el que se comía el cocodrilo. Siempre el último, el negrito, salía un tremendo cocodrilo y se lo comía. Y nadie lo lloraba, ¿verdad? Era un lugar común, amigos. Todas las malditas películas de Tarzán se veía eso. Pero we have made enormous progress. You know, we had wonderful pioneer actors like Hattie McDonald, who was the Scarlett O'Hara's valet in Gone with the Wind. She got an Oscar. She got an Academy Award for that role as a supporting actress. Then we had Sidney Poitier in the late 50s and early 70s, got an award as well. Guess Who's Coming for Dinner and El Maestro con Cariño. Grandes películas. And nowadays you have Samuel L. Jackson, Denzel Washington, Lauren Fishburne, Wesley Snipes, Will Smith. Just name it. You know, Halle Berry, you have Eddie Murphy, montones, ¿verdad? Montones. Y me alegra mucho que eso se hacía, pero no siempre fue así. Sabrina, ¿qué puedes decirme de este cuento? ¿Vas a imitar el tipo de conducta del protagonista?
Y si digo que ya soy así.
Qué alegría me da verte, amiguita. Creía haberte perdido, vos sabes. Y no te tengo en mi lista de WhatsApp. Yo pensé, ¿cómo hago para contactar a Sabrina? Y como yo te digo Cedrine, entonces ya no me acordaba que era, pero sé que es Sabrina.
A veces intercambiamos cartas en el periódico. Diferentes
Ay, en los periódicos, amigos, me han pasado cosas tan divertidas. Una vez escribí una columna de deportes y la dediqué al gran futbolista brasileño Sócrates. Juepucha, del Brasil del 82-86, jugaba con Zico, Falcao, Edgar, Toño Cerezo, Junior, Leandro, ese gran equipo. Sócrates, le decían el bisturí Sócrates, era médico de profesión, era futbolista y era médico, el bisturí, alto, que pasaba de taquito siempre las bolas, era un maestro de los pases de taquito. Sócrates Sampaio Brasileiro de Vieira Souza se llamaba. Y escribió un artículo hablando de la maravilla que era Sócrates, de sus pases de taquito. Me responde un señor en La Nación: señor Sagot, estoy perplejo por su ignorancia. Todos sabemos que Sócrates vivió en la Atenas del siglo IV antes de Pericles. Andaba con sandalias y con túnica, y con sandalias no podía hacer pases de taquito. Lo que es más, no existía el equipo Corinthians cuando vivió el señor Sócrates, y no jugaba fútbol, y no tenemos ninguna evidencia de que haya sido un gran futbolista. Lo que es más, el fútbol no había sido inventado. Por favor, infórmese. Y no contesté, amigos. ¿Cómo contestar eso sin humillar a la persona? ¿Cómo contestar eso? De las muchas respuestas que me han dado, yo creo que es la más memorable, ¿verdad? Es que, ¿cómo es posible? Todo el mundo se redaba con Sócrates. Recuerdo a Rodrigo Fournier hablando del partido Brasil. Alemania había ganado Brasil 4-1. Los goles de Brasil fueron anotados por Junior, Cerezo, Serginho y Aristóteles. Don Rodrigo Fournier. Y todo el mundo lo vaciló. Todo el mundo lo vaciló. No, Sócrates está ahora medio eclipsado, pero fue un grande. I really mean it. You're looking at me with a little skepticism, a tiny little skepticism. He was a wonderful player. A wonderful player. The kind of player that plays in a aesthetically satisfying manner, you know, elegant and very aesthetic. What he did was more like a dance than just playing soccer, you know. All his gestures, all his things were dictated by a aesthetic criteria, not just by a competitive and vulgarly footballish criteria, you know. So I'm very attached to him for that. So, ya saliste vas a investigar ahora cuando llegues. Hay montones de videos de Sócrates. No, qué bruto, era un jugadorazo. Murió el 11 de diciembre del 2010, alcoholizado hasta la madre. Otro Edgar Allan Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. En el fútbol hay montones de futbolistas alcohólicos, ¿verdad? Como les estaba diciendo, la caída de la casa Usher termina con el derrumbe de la casa, que se hunde en un pantano, se hunde en una enorme ciénaga. La casa tenía una grieta que zigzagueaba de arriba hacia abajo. Desde que llega el visitante a ayudar a su amigo Roderick de infancia y de universidad, y lo ve tan pálido, tan demacrado, lleno de terror. Oía un ruido, pasaba el viento, oía, todo lo afectaba. Tenía, los franceses dirían, un écorché vivant, un desollado vivo. Alguien que tenía los nervios expuestos, y dolía, ¿verdad? Terrible, terrible. Entonces la casa cae, se derrumba en medio del pantano. Entonces Edgar Allan Poe, díganme si lo que viene no suena como a un derrumbe monumental y luego a una paz de muerte. Dígame. No hace falta saber inglés. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath as I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly, there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have been issued, for the vast house in its shadows were alone behind me. The radiance was that of the full setting and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure of which I have before spoken, as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, the fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters. And the deep and dark tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. Realmente, ¿por qué no escribe uno así? Entonces, under, thousand, one, un sonido muy sinfónico, monumental, terrible. Y después, cuando la casa termina de hundirse, queda solo una crucecita y el blasón familiar fuera de la neblina, en la película que les digo, ¿verdad? There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound, like the voice of 1,000. Atención, shouting sound, 1,000. Shouting sound, thousands. Ow, ow, ow. And the deep and dark tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. Bellísimo. Era un prosista que no podía evitar ser poeta, ¿verdad? Nosotros tenemos previsto, evidentemente vamos a hacer otra sesión con Edgar Allan Poe, because he's everybody's shushu. Everybody loves Edgar Allan Poe. And tal vez podemos programar una tercera, ¿verdad? A petición, by popular demand. Pero si me prometen llegar todos, los que veo ahí atrás, que son nuevos, y mi querido amigo y colega distinguidísimo, Faustino de Sinach, gran novelista, pero viene a dormirse, pero bueno. Como se duerme, siempre trato de no verlo, porque es muy desmoralizante hablar con alguien. No, lo quiero como si fuera mi hermano. Y es un gran artista, y un gran escritor, y un gran fotógrafo. Entonces, vamos a hacer otro Edgar Allan Poe, ¿verdad? Una poillada. Vamos a hacer otra poillada. El término se acuñó a propósito de Schubert, el gran compositor austríaco Franz Peter Schubert. Era bohemio, pero bohemio buena nota, ¿verdad? Entonces hacía reuniones en casa de amigos de él y se tocaban sus últimas piezas y cantaba la gente y declamaban y todo. Se llamaban Schubertiadas. Las Schubertiadas. Se siguen haciendo al día de hoy. En donde yo he vivido, en París, en México, en Houston, en Arizona, en Phoenix, se hacían Schubertiadas. Participé en más de una, en honor a Schubert, para mantener esa tradición. ¿Verdad? No se trataba de llegar a pulverizar los pianos con las piezas más difíciles del repertorio. Se trataba de tener una cosa más convivial, ¿verdad? Más convivial. Schubertiadas, ¿verdad? A propósito de lo cual, ya es hora de que toque alguna cosita nueva. Ya la amenazadora presencia de Isaac me hace ver que vamos. Bueno, si estamos hablando de Schubert, tocamos algo de Schubert, que van a reconocer de inmediato, y que es una canción para la eternidad. linda es. Qué linda música, qué linda.
Muchísimas gracias, don
Gracias, Isaac. Gracias, Lili. Todo esto es obra de ellos, de Lili y de Isaac. La publicidad, bueno, yo hago lo que puedo, pero la publicidad en gran medida es obra de ellos. Yo estoy tan agradecido. Un aplauso para Lili y Isaac. Lo único que no me gusta de Isaac es que últimamente le he visto cierta telita en el ojo izquierdo. Estoy viendo que hay como una manchita en la mácula del ojo izquierdo.
Me voy a cuidar,
me tiene un poquillo obsesionado de unos días para acá.
Sí, qué bien.
Amigos, qué contento me da tenerlos aquí. Yo juré que hoy no venía nadie. Con lluvia y oscuro y húmedo y partido de fútbol, no se puede competir contra tanto. Eso solo faltaba que Shakira se presentara también y Bad Bunny en el otro lado y Maribel Guardia hiciera una pasarela, no sé, pero veo esta salita llena. Háganme un favor, sigan llegando. Cuesta llenar esta salita. En Costa Rica cuesta, amigos. Si estuviéramos en París, no, pero aquí cuesta movilizar a la gente fuera de su casa para hablar de Edgar Allan Poe. Look, no es para todos los estómagos, ¿verdad? Pero, ¿les gustó el cuento? Sí, ¿verdad? Entonces, amigos, ellos son, Lili y Isaac, ellos son los responsables de este espacio maravilloso, tan lindo, tan acogedor, ¿verdad? Es perfecto para este tipo de cosas. Y además, hasta consiguieron un pianito, entonces podemos hacer un poquillo de música. Y entonces los espero de hoy en 8, que tenemos a Carlos Salazar Herrera.
Exactamente.
¿Usted va a llegar, amiga? Sí, de hoy en 8, me promete. Tráigala, compañero. Y tráigase usted también. Amigos, una cosa importante. Yo tengo un grupo de distribución de materiales, un grupo de WhatsApp. En ese grupo mando columnas, editoriales, prólogos de libros, programas de tele, de radio, de Zoom, de esto, del otro, montones de cosas. Y publicito mis eventos también. Por cierto que el 12 de junio, jueves 12 de junio, tengo un recital en el Eugene O'Neill. 5,000 colones la entrada y va a estar muy bonito. 12 de junio, jueves 12 de junio. Yo se los estoy recordando, pero recuerden, si toco. Ahí es mostly piano. Mostly piano with a few little words here or there. It's mostly piano. Va Chopin, Liszt, Schumann, Debussy, Manuel de Falla. Jueves 12 de junio.
No, para que le llegue el material que usted manda.
Solamente llámenme a mi teléfono. Les voy a decir cuál es. 8846 7532.
¿Y qué te nos llama? 46.
Y yo creo que ese material, sí, 8846-7532. Entonces ustedes me ponen a mí, hola, mi nombre es tal y soy del grupo, lo vamos a llamar Grupo Edgar Allan Poe. ¿Ok? Soy del grupo de literatura, del Poe Group, ¿verdad? Entonces me mandan eso, entonces yo los incluyo en la lista. La lista es importante porque yo tengo que alimentarla con gente. Antes yo mandaba mis cosas a todo el mundo, pero era cansadísimo y a las pobres personas se les taqueaba el correo y todo porque yo mandaba tanto material que ya era casi un invasor cibernético. Yo era un stalker. Ya me tenían por un stalker. Entonces ya ahora decidí abrir un grupo. No es un grupo de chat. Entonces no tienen que oír ahí un viejo hablando de que su abuelita superó los cálculos renales de sus 98 años de edad o que el otro se divorció o que se murió Chepito de palo. No. Solamente subo lo que yo subo. No tienen que meterse en las fisgonas de Paso Ancho en versión cibernética. Que esos son los chat groups, ¿verdad? Las fisgonas de Paso Ancho. Entonces, métanse. Y ustedes, Sabrín, métanse porque ya yo no la tengo en mi lista. ¿Usted está en mi lista? ¿Por qué no la veo?
Jack, allá nos está pidiendo si podría repetir su número. 8846 7532. Okay. Bueno, entonces vamos a dar conclusión a este espacio. Jack habló mucho de nosotros por la parte logística y obviamente nosotros hacemos esto con mucho gusto. No sería lo mismo sin tener un gran expositor y no sería lo mismo sin el público que viene y que interactúa. Así que agradecemos mucho que ustedes nos estén acompañando en este espacio. Invitados, este mes todavía nos quedan un par de martes. Entonces, la próxima semana vamos a hablar de Carlos Salazar y la semana que sigue, la última semana de mayo, vamos a estar hablando de Agatha Christie, otra versión en inglés.
Y Carlos Salazar Herrera.
También, para el siguiente ciclo, ¿verdad? Si ustedes se han registrado en el formulario, ¿verdad? Para el siguiente ciclo nos gustaría poderlos enviar la información del siguiente ciclo de Ink and Insight. Sí, este ya es el segundo mes y queremos seguirlo, queremos seguir por el resto de años hasta que a Jack le dé la batería. Entonces, y hasta que ustedes nos
yo soy el conejito de Ever Ready. Yo sigo hasta sin batería.
Entonces vamos a enviarles esa información y ya que mostraron interés también en recitales, vamos a estar haciendo llegar entonces la invitación al recital por el correo electrónico.
Entonces, si me escriben ahí, me dicen, yo soy tal, pertenezco al grupo Edgar Allan Poe. Entonces yo los incluyo y ahí estarán recibiéndome material. Atención, es mucho. Que lo diga Sabrín, es mucho. Pero ustedes no tienen que leerlo todo. Se brincan lo que no les interesa y leen lo que les llame la atención. Entonces es bonito tenerlos ahí integrados. Usted, amiguita, que ha estado sonriendo toda la clase, es tan bonito que lo escuchen a uno con una sonrisa, es muy reassuring. Igual usted, corazón. Sí, amigo.
Yo quiero agradecer que nos dan esta oportunidad de venir a oírte. Jack es una persona muy respetada en Costa Rica.
Claro.
Y bien que lo podemos disfrutar. Así es que realmente me siento muy contento de haber tenido esta oportunidad.
Gracias, querido amigo. Es un privilegio tenerte ahora entre mis amigos. Es un privilegio para mí.
Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, entonces vamos a dar por concluido. Si gustan quedarse unos minutitos más hablando con Jack, siéntanse en la libertad, pero ya nosotros terminamos. Muchísimas gracias.